Welcome, everybody, to the show. It is Counterclipping show number 105 for January 2nd, 2023. So, Happy New Year to everybody. I'm glad you could all make it. Tonight's topic is the best of Avalon Hill. Now, it says in the title 1972 to 1982, and I'm not sure we're going to get that far because having put that list together, it's big. There's a lot in there. But if we don't, we were going to roll over into a third episode of this anyway, which is tentatively scheduled for 2 weeks from tonight. So we will get to it. We are clipping, as you can see, the musket and pike dual pack. If the lighting and the camera angle looks different, that is because hopefully it's an improvement. If not, please say so, because I'd like to unfuck it if it isn't. This is the ring light, which I actually mounted to the wall, which has been available for some time, and I just had it like on a stand over here, and it was less effective. And also I got a new monitor, which is a big panoramic monitor, which is awesome. And this is the first stream. I was really excited about streaming with this thing because I have like everything open here, and it's fantastic, and I don't have to shuffle between tabs. But it's a different angle for the camera because the camera sits atop the monitor. So and we are drinking this Shiner Peach and Pecan Christmas beer, and it's okay. We're gonna stick with beer until my my voice condition cleans up, I think. Hopefully that won't be too much longer. So a few things. First of all, please do like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are not already subscribed, so that we can overtake those rats at the Player's Aid in 10 years. But also super chats and super stickers are enabled. So if you'd like to help support the channel, it's a great way to do that. It is also a great way to get your comment highlighted so I won't miss it, which is a thing that, as we've seen, has been known to occur, particularly if we have like 140 plus in the chat. I didn't advertise this stream at all, so I don't know that we'll get there tonight because I just didn't have time. We were actually doing stuff today. But otherwise, we will proceed. We got a couple pieces of news and a couple pieces of miscellaneous stuff, and then we're going to move rather quickly to the best of Avalon Hill. Because like I said, there's a lot to do here. So before we get any farther, let's say hello to Andrew Franca, Carl Crater from the Wargame Bootcamp, Mike Burnett, Chad Canady, who is playing Last Blitzkrieg, which is fantastic, Mark McNair playing Death in the Trenches. Mark, I'd be very curious to know what you think of that. Clark Commando 1983. Mark, welcome from Lodi, California. Jeffrey Edwards, Roy McGaw, welcome to the stream. Vince Ree, Michael Schmaus, Joe Perez, Ed Holtzman. Oh shit. Oh shit. Oh shit. We are having technical difficulties. I don't know if you can still hear me or not, but things have gone awry. Let's see if we can fix this with a button push. This, folks, is why I needed a new computer, and probably need one to go with this new monitor because AMD is shit. So I think we recovered from that. That was almost certainly a graphics glitch. So let's resume, saying hello to HUN644, Kyle Harris, Bill Simone, Joe Faust from not incredibly sunny, gloomy, and foggy Northeast Ohio today. Brian Gash, the legend Fucko. Lind Pratt is setting up NATO this week. Lind, I assume that is the new NATO from Compass. It's excellent. If so, I'm not sure if you know, you probably do, that there will be a game of NATO being played. It's on the calendar for Winterfest this year. Old Lady Plays from Canada. Welcome back to the stream. Michael Potts, Fast Hines, William Bird, Jeff Anderson, Six Actual. I'm trying to not miss anybody, and I'm going through the chat actually as opposed to doing it the other way. E4 Airman from lovely Dayton, Ohio. Ed Meister, welcome back. Joe Okabayashi. Brant from the Armchair Dragoons. Yes, Brant, we'll be getting to you in the Wargaming news. Board Gaming Geezer, Tim Zales, Michael Simon, Meandering Mike, who I believe is having another giveaway over on his channel. Harold Buchanan himself from the San Diego Historical Games Convention, among other things, is here. Bill Simone, if I didn't get to you, I thought I did. Richard Hegman, David Imperato, Paperless Writer, welcome back. I'm not sure I've seen you in a while. John Clark, Matt Davidson, Kilroy, if Kilroy was here, Drew Detterer, Iggy Cricktal, Brian Foley, welcome back. Yeah, the monitors just like went dark, and I'm like, what's going on? I don't know what's going on. I don't know what is going on. And I turned, like, pushed the power button and it came back up. It didn't actually power down. Hero 1117, welcome back. I think I got everybody. Charles Latour, I didn't get you yet. Perfidious Albion, welcome back to the stream. And Matt Taylor and Eric Holmgren from Eric's Table Napoleonic Battles, if I'm not mistaken. So Twitch has this kind of cool thing where at like the end of your stream, you can raid another stream and like send all your viewers to them. If anybody knows how to do that in YouTube, I'm not sure that's a feature YouTube has available. But if anybody knows how to do that, please get in touch with me because I would love to send all my people to Eric's Labette stream after the show. That would be fantastic for everybody involved. So, welcome. I hope I'm back to scotch. I actually got 2 new bottles, not new, but ish bottles of scotch upstairs, and I'm just not appreciating it right now. Somebody brought over a bottle of um Ardbeg Wee Beastie, which I've had on the stream before, and which I like it. It's okay, but it's like hard to drink a whole bottle of it. It was very challenging to drink a whole bottle of it. Garrison Ben and John Stanley, welcome back to the stream. So that one did not go off as planned today. So I guess before I'll get to the screen share news that I got to do, we'll talk about the 3D printer misadventure. So if you're not following me on social media, there's links to literally everything in the video description. And I have decided that this is what I'm going to use TikTok for, is 3D printing. If I have 3D printing videos, now if I do like war game stuff, and I'll talk about that in a minute, then I'll do a YouTube video on that. But right now, it's just like, here, watch the printer run for 20 seconds. That shit's going to TikTok. So if you want to see that stuff, go follow me on TikTok. Mastodon on the wargamers.social server seems to be going very well. So we can take a look at that too. We had John Stanley, we had basically no problems. I mean, we put the fireplace on, but other than that, everything was working. Another thing that we noticed though is like, man, it's really warm in the basement. And that typically indicates that there's a vent open in the basement and all the hot air is like just staying down in the basement. I finally found that vent. It had been over my head almost the entire time, but we finally found that vent. My energy level is not where it should be, so I also have a can of emergency diet Mountain Dew here. Let's try and kill that. It is the official beverage of my people. It was pretty cold for a few days. I mean, it wasn't bananas cold, but it was cold. Meandering Mike says that his game giveaway for New Year's is complete, and the next one will be starting this weekend. He's given all kinds of stuff away. So you should definitely be checking out Mike's content, and the shout outs are much appreciated anyway. Now on to the 3D printing stuff. So I got the 3D printer on Christmas, set it up on Monday, and did the first prints on Tuesday, and was several things which I showed off last week printed great and everything. I think this was the timetable, maybe it wasn't, I don't know. But in any case, I spent 3 or 4 days between waiting on parts that I felt I needed and just kind of struggling with getting the thing to stick to the print bed and all that stuff. But I believe I have solved those problems now, and I have the finished counter storage box with the slide top. So at some point, I got to work on print quality yet, but that's not a design problem. That's a slicer problem. So at some point, I'll put these up to make them available for folks who don't have 3D printers. Or folks who do have 3D printers, and we maybe think about doing something for other folks. Now, this comes with 12 containers that will store counters very efficiently. It is with the lid, it is 22 millimeters tall, and without the lid, it is 20. And each of these compartments will store 10 or really 11 relatively thick counters. I should actually try it with this game to make sure that that's correct, because these are a little bit thicker than the multi-man counters that I was using, but I'm pretty sure this thing will hold at least 120 counters. This is, I don't know, 2 inches by 3 inches maybe, and it will hold almost half a counter sheet. Now, this is only good for tweezer folks. So bear that in mind. And the lid, the lid's not coming off, right? The sort of semi-rough finish on the 3D print, just because that's what it is working to our advantage in holding this slide top lid on. Now, let's say we want to start storing case blue without having a 1-inch bulge on the box, which I currently have. I'm not sure you can kind of see it right up here next to GB2. That's where something more like this comes in. This successfully finished printing today, and this has 48 compartments. Um, I can get 2 counter trays into this thing in approximately the same amount of space as 1/4 of a GMT counter tray. So these are a little higher. I could make them shorter, should that prove to be necessary, but I'm not sure that it is. I'm also working on a storage solution for Space Empires, which I'm kind of trying to future proof against the last expansion that's still coming. This is going to be, they're not all going to necessarily be these stack style counter trays, but the ones I've been working on are, and frankly, those are the most work to build. Ones with just compartments are going to be easier. Um, Everything is going smoothly right now, and there's another lid for this size container working on the printer right now, and it actually probably will finish right around the time that the stream is done, and then I will put the bottom of the tray on. That takes about 8 hours. There are things you can do to make that faster, but I wanted to do. I want to be able to reliably print these things first, and then we will worry about optimizing speed. Um, but yes, if folks are going to ask, HUN 644, yes, you will need. I mean, you can just dump the whole thing in a tray if you want, but the intention is that you will use tweezers, and you can, having tested it, you can easily remove the counters one at a time or a stack at a time with tweezers. There's a little riser on the bottom to lift the bottom of the bottom counter a little bit off the bottom of the tray, so you should have no problem with that. Carl Crater from the Wargame Boot Camp is clipping second edition Beyond Waterloo from ATO. I really kind of want to see that. That was really something I knew about, but had just looked at with the passing of John Prados. This is a very interesting idea. This would save on. It's less important that it saves on plastic. This thing costs something like 50 cents in plastic to make. So that means this thing would be roughly $1. Maybe I don't know. It might be more. I haven't done that calculation. But Doug, that's a good idea. What is a probably a little more important is that it would save on time because you're not laying filament down during those periods. Now it's not quite that simple. The manufacturer, were I to sell these, and I'm not saying I plan to, but I'm not going to pretend it hasn't occurred to me either. The big bottleneck is the amount of time they take to print and not the material cost, and that isn't counting time I have spent already fucking with the printer to get it to actually work. So like I said, materials cost on this thing, which I have done the math on, is like 54 cents. Okay, so if the other one, which is 4 times as many compartments, is about 4 times as much, manufacturing cost looks like about $2. Now that's way more than it costs to manufacture a GMT counter tray. How much in electricity? Asks Jeff Beeler. That's a great question. I have not calculated that at all, but that is not an amount that would be zero. But it's an intriguing idea. And shit, I'd have bought them. Speaking of storage solutions, I do have some trays from Cube for Me on the way. Those come from Poland, so I'm not sure when they're going to get here. But they appear to already, the U.S. Postal Service already appears to be waiting for them. So I believe you could reliably count on a video from me on those when they arrive. Not that there's not a whole bunch already. The um, the big variable with the 3D printed stuff is just the amount of time that it takes to print them. Now, I'm doing one at a time in right now, and I'm not even doing both pieces of the tray. I'm doing the lid separately from the base. Um, there are ways you can optimize that. So and that is a future project. Also working on, if I didn't say, yeah, I did say this about Space Empires. I'm working on something for that because I looked at the stuff, just glanced at the stuff that's in the boxes already, and it's absolutely impossible to store all that in the even with a 3D printed solution in a 3-inch box with everything that's there already. There's just no way to do it, and it's the tiles that create the big problem on that. I have no reason, Michael Sunborg. I thank you. I have no reason to doubt that they will get here. It is just a matter of how much time that's going to take, and I have no idea. I'm not sure I've ever gotten anything from Poland before. But yeah, so if you want to follow the 3D printing saga in greater detail than you're going to get, other than that update, which is probably more than you're typically going to get from this show, go follow me on TikTok. I have found a use for TikTok. In any event, coming up on MLK weekend are two events that I'm aware of, actually. Maybe there's more. One is Winter Offensive. That's Multi-Man's official event, which I decided I'm not going for because I decided I'm going to stay home and support Brant with the Armchair Dragoons digital convention, which has badges for sale. So you can head over to the Armchair Dragoons webpage. There is a link to the webpage, but it's really to the calendar in the video description. There's a whole bunch of cool stuff on this already. Some of it will be led by moi. In particular, if you are interested in and need help learning Great Campaigns of the American Civil War, we will be doing a teach and play of Great Campaigns of the American Civil War for those unfortunates not able to get to Winter Offensive to play in a giant tournament of it. Of course, Brant would know that there's 4 different conventions over MLK weekend. Maybe, Brant, that means you should have it on the following weekend or the previous weekend, because then it would not have been a schedule conflict. I'm just making suggestions here. The Cube for Me trays look. Mike Andrew, thanks for stopping by. The Cube for Me trays look very interesting. Um, well, so he says that the Cube for Me trays are the best, no wasted spaces like GMT has on the edges, and they securely close all the time. So while there may not be as much dead space on the edges as the GMT trays, they are still blow molded trays and still have a substantial amount of air taking up their volume. That is the design intent behind this, because this has basically zero air in it. Okay, but that's a concern with any counter tray where you're not storing the counters in actual stacks. So Brant, you should be worried about a conflict with every other convention because your convention is an online convention. And the whole point of that is so that everybody can go, even if they are in places like Oregon. So, yeah, minis are not some. Okay, so the one exception, and I'm a little surprised that nobody like figured this out. It is not my intention to 3D print miniatures. I bought the kind of printer that is not the best kind of print. Well, I didn't buy it. I asked for it, and to my surprise, I received it for Christmas. But the reason that printer was on the list is not because it's good at printing miniatures. You really want a resin printer for that. I wanted it to print wargaming ding dongs, and it is going to be great at that. However, that said, the one, John, I'm going to put the link in to the Armchair Dragons digital convention thing in the video description. There it is. The one exception to this might end up being the 28 millimeter Traveler starships, which are amazing and which are to just buy the files is not that expensive. It's like $50 per ship. That's really very reasonable. So, so that is a thing that I might do. What I would do with such a thing, I'm not sure. But in any event, we'll probably investigate that at some point. But right now, ahead of that on the schedule are all kinds of wargaming gadgets like these little stacking trays. Thank you, Nathan from Wise Guy History, for turning me on to that. Those are great. But like wall mounted tweezer racks and shit like that, drawer organizers, all that stuff is well ahead of the 250 hours that it takes to print the 28 millimeter Traveler Starship. All right, so moving along out of the Armchair Dragoons digital convention and the 3D printing catch up, which admittedly, I spent more time on than I had anticipated. On we go to Avalon Hill, and it is the year 1972. Now, we start off, these are in chronological order by year. They're not necessarily in order of release because some of these might have been released in January, and BGG doesn't keep track of that. So this is Status Pro basketball. I mentioned last time that I had played both Status Pro football and Status Pro baseball, and for what it was worth, enjoyed them at the time. And this would have been in the 80s, sounds about right. So bear that in mind. I was more interested in specifically football at the time than I am now, but that was before Art Modell boned the city of Cleveland, which kind of soured me on football in general, to be honest. Um, yeah, so Doug says that the ships are very slow and expensive to print. I'm not sure about expensive. I mean, the filament is relatively inexpensive. I mean, the stuff I got, which I got at Christmas, it's not filament I bought, and it's neither the cheapest nor the most expensive filament that one can find. costs $20 a roll, right? And this thing takes, I don't know, 25 grams or something like that off that 1 kilogram roll. So expensive. I mean, you might go through a couple rolls of filament on that. That's completely believable. But um, for a 28 millimeter starship the size of a large serving platter, I think that 100 or $200 is pretty reasonable. And I don't have the sense that it would take you 5 rolls of filament to print one of those. I mean, I'm new at this, so I could be wrong. So if you are, I will mention again that if you are into sports games, I know that ID Jester over on his channel does a fair amount of sports game coverage. So if you are interested in that, go check him out. Next up is yet another sports game. There's going to be a whole bunch of these. This is the era in which there was some kind of deal between Avalon Hill and Sports Illustrated. Doesn't that seem totally surreal right now? In which they had an official line of Sports Illustrated games, and apparently Superstar Baseball, which I never did play, is one of those. Daniel, welcome back to the stream. Nice to see you again. Doug says expect a free trader to take somewhere in the 4 to 8 rolls of filament range. Well, that's $100 or $200. That's $80 to $160 of the filament that I'm buying. You can get it cheaper. The 2 rolls of filament that I bought for myself were in fact cheaper. They're $18 a piece. I got them from Micro Center. If you have a Micro Center locally, Micro Center is all in on 3D printing. They are, to my knowledge, the best brick and mortar store. And you can do this all online, of course, to get everything for 3D printers, from the printers to the enclosures to the filament they got aisles of filament. It's amazing. And I will mention that the Micro Center in Columbus has a better 3D printing section than the Micro Center in Mayfield Heights. There's probably demographic reason for that, about which I don't have any insight. So, well, this is called Sports Illustrated Baseball, but the cover says Superstar Baseball, so I'm calling it Superstar Baseball. But in any event, I never played this. There's a whole pile of these, though. I am positive that you did not, in fact, receive any free Sports Illustrated gadgetry with your purchase of that game. So Richthofen's War. This is one of those games that is, the date here is 1972, so a little after I was born. And this is an all-time classic. A lot of people started wargaming on games like this, and on Bulge 65 and stuff like that. This is a decent game. And if you really want a World War II dogfighting experience, I'm not sure this is where you go today. But it is an all-time classic, and it's another one that I recommend that wargamers give a shot to and play it at least once, just so they can have the experience of doing this. Wade Moore, welcome back to the stream. Panzerblitz was in fact last week. We're going by original publication date just because I'm not tracking down the date that Avalon Hill got it, which would have put Panzerblitz in this show rather than last show. But the date we had for Panzerblitz was 70 or 71, which covered it last week. I don't know if we'll get to 82. If we don't, we'll just put those on the end next time. So, and we'll see a couple of those things that chronologically fall into a different year because they were originally published by SPI or Battleline or whoever, right? And a bunch of those will come up this week. So Ricky's War is another one. There's a billion of them in print. Do not pay a lot of money for one. If you can get like a shrink wrapped, really nice copy, maybe you pay 50 or 60 bucks for it. But if you just want a beat up play copy to have it and maybe try it out, I believe you're looking at a $20 or less purchase. So don't pay a lot for it, but it's worth experiencing. It's one of those. Point of Law. This was a pickup from 3M. I believe I mentioned last week that when you, Brant, did you bone me on the putting up the things? So that is a Brant question. Brant is here. Hopefully we will ask. He will answer that question. And the cover Ricky's War is really, really good too. You won't be seeing that this week. Possibly, this is going to be at least 3 and maybe 4 episodes of the best of Avalon Hill, right? Because I want to cover everything. I'm trying to blow through this kind of stuff, and we keep getting sidetracked on this. Maybe that's because when Point of Law comes up, that's when I check the chat. Um, well, Brant says it's there, so I'm sure it's there because he is a technical wizard. So there you go. Learn to play great campaigns in the American Civil War. Um, this is another courtroom game, obviously unplayed by me. So we will be moving on to Outdoor Survival. Now, I've never played this either, but this is an interesting game for a couple of reasons. Designed by Jim Dunnigan, not a shock. A direct design for Avalon Hill rather than something that Dunnigan did for SPI and then got picked up by Avalon Hill later on. There's a bunch of those. Or there was a couple of those last time, but there's going to be several more tonight. Well, I'm not sure that they're Dunnigan designs, but at least they're SPI designs. So this is exactly what it sounds like. The map is a wilderness, and you have to survive in said wilderness. This was one of Avalon Hill's best-selling games. Here's why. The original white box or brown box, if you like, Dungeons and Dragons, had only dungeons in it. There were no outdoor rules. That book said, if you want to do adventuring outdoors, go buy Avalon Hill's Outdoor Survival. So that is why this thing was one of Avalon Hill's best-selling games. There's a lot of these in print. A lot of them will be in dire condition. You can see that there are copies for as low as $1 here on the Geek Marketplace. And the top condition copy, which is only listed as good, is $20. It's going to be difficult to find in really good condition. This is not. I mean, I wouldn't call this a war game. It's a wargaming non-war game, I guess I'd say, and consequently, maybe this isn't a great game for wargamers, but it is nevertheless interesting. And as a Dunnigan design, one is inclined to say, I'd kind of like to see this. And I like games like this too, where you're just kind of playing against the game. Obviously, this will place, as to the extent that it plays well. It does not have a great reputation as a game on its own. To the extent that it plays well, it should go great solitaire, right? So the $1 copies are basically a removal fee at that point, says Brant, and he's basically right. This is in a way even less desirable than something like Avalon Hill's Kriegspiel, because there's a lot more of these around. There's a lot of these around. They are not rare. They are not expensive. They are easy to find on the marketplace. If you are looking for one in really good condition, that might be challenging, and you might end up paying a little more. This is at this point what I would call one of the many curiosities found in the Avalon Hill catalog. Jeff Beeler asks if there was a ground module for Richthofen's War. I've never heard of any such thing. I can tell you that. And I'm not sure. Yes, I mean, there was. It was called Panzer. Well, it wouldn't have been Panzerblitz. I guess it would have been. It really wouldn't have been 1914 either. I guess the Guns of August is what you're really fishing for here. Daniel asks about Source of the Nile. I have Source of the Nile, and I think it's quite a neat game, personally. It also solitaires extremely well. You can either do that with just one dude wandering around in a wilderness, or you can do it with that is where those go. Or you can just solitaire multiple parties of wanderers if you want. It's quite a neat game. And we might get to it tonight, and we'll be talking about that if we do. So moving on from Outdoor Survival, France 1940. This is another Jim Dunnigan design picked up from SPI. We're already through the counters I had at the beginning of the show. So let's grab some more here. France 1940. This is what it sounds like. Operational level simulation of the German invasion of France in 1940. Now, I will not lie. It's a Dunnigan design, so there's probably interesting mechanical things happening here. I'll completely agree with that probable statement. However, this is a very challenging topic to design because the French got turned into chowder in 6 weeks, right? How do you simulate that and make it a game that does not suck? That's a challenging design. Design goal for a designer doing a design on this topic. At least if you're going to cover the whole thing. If you're going to do tactical engagements, that's a little different. You could pick tactical engagements where it was competitive, but the entire 6-week campaign was not competitive. The best game I've played on this topic, and it's not particularly close, is OCS Blitzkrieg Legend, which solves that problem by basically putting all the pressure on the Germans. And it's not just a schedule, right? It's not like you got to beat a clock. I mean, you do have a clock to beat as well, and that's part of it. But you really have to be very efficient as the Germans in that game, because frankly, the French, and as they did, have a lot to stop you with. And if the French have a really good execution, you're going to have a really hard time as the Germans in that game. Now, historically, the French did not have really good execution here in this particular campaign. So there's that. Somebody asked, and I'm not sure if I mentioned it, whether there would be a storage solution thing for musket and pike, and there might be, and it might be a 3D printed storage solution, which I will do a video on that just as a storage solutions video. But you can't ask people to go out and buy a $200 3D printer, buy a bunch of filament, and then spend a month figuring out how to make the thing work, even if somebody else gives you the files. So another interesting thing here is I am reasonably sure this is one of the relatively rare Redmond Simonson Avalon Hill covers, which in itself is kind of interesting. Now, if I were in the market for this, and I'm not, I would probably advise running down an Avalon Hill copy. They're going to be easier to find in good condition. This is also something that's maybe not as cheap as Ricky's War, but this is also something that you should not have to pay a giant pile of cash for. Redmond Simonson had absolutely caveman-like materials to work with and was an absolute genius. A Redmond Simonson cover is always striking, even where he only had 2 colors and old photos to work with, which is pretty much the case here. Black and 2 other colors, that's all he had. And this is this cover. This is, if I'm not mistaken, this image is of the Avalon Hill cover, but the SPI cover was basically the same, to the best of my recollection. So Perfidious Albion says, does OCS Blitzkrieg Legend stifle the French command control as it was historically? So there is an optional rule very strictly limiting French strategic moves. Other than that, no. And yet it is also challenging for the French if the German player isn't a noob, right? Yeah. So this is Doug. Doug hits it right on the head here. He says he loves Simonson's art, but he likes Simonson's art, but loves his graphic design work. That I think is the key takeaway there. Is that Redmond Simonson was, a good artist, but he was an absolute genius graphic designer. A lot of the physical presentation of war games that we still see now is due to Redmond Simonson. Alan Salazar asks if there's a Europa version of this campaign. Indeed, there is. It is called Fall of France, and in my opinion, it is one of the Europa things. Let me phrase this carefully, because I do not wish it to seem as otherwise an endorsement of Europa. There are many reasons to not get into Europa. There are some reasons to experience Europa, and I put that way very intentionally. The Fall of France game on its own is not one of them. It is a great example that came relatively early of how the Europa design methodology went wrong, in my opinion. Because they balanced the campaign by just going absolutely bananas on the OB. And it does not well reflect either the campaign, nor is it a particularly good or interesting game. So that is my opinion, and the Europa people will write me angry letters now. Decathlon. The Sports Illustrated game is a simulation of the Olympic decathlon. For those of us who played on whatever platform that was, summer games and winter games, the old video games, this might be interesting. Nevertheless, I cannot imagine that it is highly sought after nowadays, but there's none on the geek market. So maybe that means that it is incredibly rare and valuable, but that doesn't appear to be the case. So Decathlon, another of these Sports Illustrated series, and not one that's particularly well remembered. Now, I've talked about this one already. This is Status Pro Football, and I found design on this, at least BGG lists it as a Jim Barnes design. I played this again back in what I believe to be the late '80s and enjoyed it quite a bit. So, if you are into sports games, then the Status Pro line had pretty much all of the all of the sports, and from my experience, they were actually pretty fun. Jeff Beeler, thanks so much appreciated. 1940 German move, fight move, Allies fight move. Okay, so asymmetric. See, this is why these early Jim Dunnigan designs are worth looking at, right? Because that could be the first game like this, where you have an asynchronous or an asymmetrical sequence of play. That's a really interesting idea that has been used to good effect, some more than once. But it's an interesting idea that we don't see that often. Jeff Beeler mentions that Carl Fung has updated the BCS pipeline today with news about what he's working on. SCS as well, actually. And there is some interesting things in there, but there is nothing actually new in there. The next game will be BCS Valley of Tears, which is Arab-Israeli Wars, which I will buy, breaking my moratorium on that topic. And then the next one after that will probably be Kalak, which is attempted breakout or break back in to Stalingrad, which looks and sounds quite interesting. So, looking forward to both those. Those are both guaranteed money flowing from me to Multi-Man Publishing. Okay, the Peter Principle game, designed by Lawrence J. Peter. This was published in the wake of the best-selling success of Dr. Peter's book, The Peter Principle. I am not sure I was aware of another of these marketing tie-ins by Avalon Hill, and I don't care about this one, so we'll be moving on. Next is another Jim Dunnigan design, moving from SPI to Avalon Hill, and this one is Panzer Army Africa. Again, so many of these are worth, even if they don't necessarily stand up as games nowadays, and a lot of them, frankly, don't. A lot of these are worth looking at just for the innovations at the time. I mean, we're still talking about 1973 here. So very interesting game. Are there better games nowadays on North Africa? Yes, almost certainly. But you can also see that here's a like new copy for $50, which I feel like that's a little high. But if the like new status, which to me means it is in the shrink wrap, and the shrink wrap is not, it's not caved in or anything like that, then $50 is probably not a crazy price. Chad Kennedy mentions that a game using Vance von Boris' asymmetrical sequence of play might work for France 1940. Yeah, I actually agree. So if you're not familiar with that, I believe Chad is referring to the asymmetric sequence of play used in the GMT East Front series, which is designed by Vance. And that is a well-regarded series. It's got some features that some people don't like the soak-off attacks and stuff like that. But Brian Foley mentions that Legion is starting to ship La Primogenita this week. I forget what that is actually about, but I remember being interested in it when I heard about it. So this is April 1941 to November 1942. This isn't like 1940 to 1942, right? This is Western Desert Campaign, but it's the latter half of the Western Desert Campaign. I'm getting these mixed up here. So again, counters look fine. These are perfectly decent counters. Actually, I'd other than the center nibs, I'd call them above average for Avalon Hill of the era. Go for the Green, a game of strategy. This is another. I will be completely honest. I have never heard of this thing in connection to Avalon Hill. So if we go to versions, we only see an English edition, and Avalon Hill and Sports Illustrated are what BGG says. So BGG says it was published by Avalon Hill, but doesn't actually produce any information that says it was produced by Avalon Hill. Okay, so Challenge Golf at Pebble Beach. This is a simple board game version of golf in the 3M Bookshelf series. It's another one where I don't really remember this from Avalon Hill, but that doesn't mean they didn't do it because I traditionally did not pay tons and tons of attention to the sports games. Um, that certainly looks like a 3M game to me. Great cover, actually. I will say that. As somebody relentlessly uninterested in golf games, I have to admit that that is a very good cover. Joe Perez says it was terrible. I am prepared to assume that Joe is correct on this. Challenge football. This is going to be another Sports Illustrated tie-in, I would imagine. I take the role of coaches. We can see the board, which looks basically like you'd expect, except there's weird squiggles on them. I don't know what that actually means. Um, but again, sports games, huge Avalon Hill presence in this space. And if we move really quickly through these, we might get to all the war games. Challenge Bridge. Why you would need to buy a bridge game from Avalon Hill, I am unclear if you are into bridge. But they did one. And this is apparently also came from 3M. So this uses a special deck of cards and a punch card overlay. Allows 4 people to play tournament bridge. 100 predetermined deals taken from American Contact Bridge League tournaments. This sounds terrible. You're like playing with somebody else's hands. What? That's dumb. Anyway, what's this go for? More than you'd think. Among the very collectible bridge crowd, I suppose. David Imperato says that Legion game is a remake of Road to Charon, which sounds right. Business strategy. Now, I never played this, but this is one that I remember. And you'll notice, interestingly, that a lot of these sort of weird business and courtroom games don't get credits on BGG. And I can think of a couple reasons for that. One of which might be, hypothetically, that nobody cares to check the rule book to see who designed it. But a lot of these are pretty early too, and maybe they don't have credits in the rule book too. That's possible. This is played with little pawns. I can tell you that because I've seen it somewhere. And here's like a regional thing. I kind of like business games. I mean, this might be something I might enjoy. Nevertheless, I am not going to take the trouble to run this down on eBay. If I find it for $3 at a garage sale, I might grab it and take a look at it. But Callendale has apparently played it. So if you want more information on business strategy, go turn to Mr. Callendale on that. Bowl Bound. This is the college football game. And unless I am mistaken, and I might be, there may still be people playing this at WBC nowadays. So, Chad, this is a fair statement. I believe that I would rather see Vance get busy on the East Front series rather than working on new stuff or even help Encompass republish his older stuff. Doug says that duplicate bridge, which I assume is the descriptor for what I just described, is a standard thing. And that may be, but it sounds unappealing to me. Except as a strictly learning exercise, perhaps. Acquire is really an abstract strategy game that with a business veneer. Acquire is a pretty good game, though. I mean, I can vouch for Acquire. An all-time classic, Wooden Ships and Iron Men, designed by the late and unfortunately neglected as a designer, in my opinion, S. Craig Taylor. This is a game that came out of Battle Line. If we look at versions here, we're going to find the Avalon Hill version was 1975. Battle Line was 1974. Now, what the chronology was in buying Battle Line exactly, I'm not sure without looking it up. But Battle Line was basically owned by Heritage, the miniatures people, and was run by S. Craig Taylor and Steve Peak. Steve Peak is, as far as I know, still with us. S. Craig Taylor, unfortunately, passed a number of years ago. And S. Craig Taylor is going to have been responsible for a number of the best games that we will have on this list tonight. Doug says that this game is that Doug? Yes, Doug Sunset says that Wooden Ships and Iron Men is still worth playing. I completely agree. This is still one of the best games on the topic. It is a pretty detailed game, but it is not as detailed as, say, Close Action. This is a fantastic game. So, highly recommended, and several of the ones that I will say highly recommended on will in fact be games designed by S. Craig Taylor. So take that for what it's worth. Next is the truly bizarre witchcraft ritual kit. Why? I don't know. Why did they do this? I don't know. There's apparently a black magic ritual kit, which this was published in conjunction to. Um, both kits were based on research by Dr. Brooke Hayward Jennings. Okay, so this is maybe an attempt by Avalon Hill to cash in on occultism trends that were occurring in the mid 1970s. I have no idea. This is not a product that we need to spend a lot of time on. Another all-time classic, and this one not designed by S. Craig Taylor. This is a John Edwards game. The cover you see here is of the new Compass Games edition. The original was released by Jedco, and the Compass Games edition that just came out pretty recently, and I have an unboxing. Go check that out if you want to see what's inside. It's very nice. Is a very faithful recreation of the original Jedco game. Game originally came out from Jedco, and if in fact, if we look at versions once again, if we look at versions, we're going to see the original Jedco version. Actually, BGG, damn it. They listed Jedco first edition and a second edition, both in the same year. I don't know if that's accurate or not. This is another one of those things where BGG is maybe letting us down a little bit. Avalon Hill first edition happened in 1977, and that it is the Avalon Hill version that, with slightly revised rules, as I recall, that is the seminal classic that this is. Russian campaign in whatever form still gets played. There is still demand for Russian campaign, as evidenced by the very large number of people who ordered a new edition of it, a fifth edition from GMT, and that game should be shipping pretty soon. Joe Faust, actually, Joe, I bet you are right on this. I did not think of a connection with The Exorcist, but I would, now that you've said that, I would be reasonably surprised that if you were proved to be wrong. Let me put it that way. Um, so it's still a dumb product for Avalon Hill. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I can't imagine that they were top sellers. Let me put it that way. And I also can't imagine that they did the hobby gaming a lot of good when so much progress had been made in the preceding years to get hobby games into department stores, which they were possibly not this early, but um, this kind of thing was something that would have undermined that. Now, there's other concerns other than just purely mercenary concerns. I certainly agree with that, but I'm fighting over the witchcraft construction kit is not a battle I would be willing to have, not a hill I would be willing to die on. Russian campaign, on the other hand, is a fantastic game, well worth playing. Are there other implementations of the same basic thing that are out now that are either more detailed or more streamlined? Yes, there are, and maybe you prefer those, but this is still an all-time classic and falls into highly recommended territory. Tim Zale says that the Book of Black Magic stuff goes for big dollars. Okay, well, great for those people. Okay, we have talked about this in several contexts already, including our show on strategic level World War II games and including our show on John Prados. This is Rise and Decline of the Third Reich. This is another all-time classic from Avalon Hill. This thing was played absolutely to death, and it's my supposition that has permanently marked the development of the successor games, including Advanced Third Reich and Rising Sun, and A World at War, which is currently available from GMT. I believe it's currently in print anyway. Andrew Cook asks if he has Russia Besieged, should he get Russian Campaign 5th? If you like Russia Besieged, then you might feel that Russian Campaign of whatever edition, and I don't expect the GMT edition to radically differ from previous editions to the extent that Russia Besieged does. So I think you might feel a little bit let down or underwhelmed by Russian campaign because it's going to give you less detail. If you really like Russia Besieged, I would stick with that. You are going to get a very Russian campaign-esque experience out of Russia Besieged. Let me put it that way. This is true, actually. So there is a novel inspired by this game, I believe called The Third Reich. And if you search for the Third Reich novel, I think it'll come up by a Spanish author. I believe it has been published in English. It sounds genuinely bizarre, and it's basically about a dude who is obsessed with playing Third Reich. Um, so it sounds bizarre, yet maybe interesting. I don't know. Mark McNair says this is his number one game of all time, and frankly, that doesn't surprise me at all. This is a game that you could absolutely just play the absolute pants off of, and a lot of people did. So all time classic. I don't know that I need to say any more about this, having covered it in detail previously. Panzer Leader. So this is the second in a loose trilogy of games that started with Panzer Blitz and which more or less use the Panzer Blitz system, but each of them add additional things. Panzer Leader is basically the West Front implementation of Panzer Blitz with, as I said, a couple additional things. Now, designers credited by BGG include Randall Reed, who we've encountered before, Nick Smith, who I'm not sure we have, and Dave Clark, who is presumably not the Dave Clark from the Dave Clark 5. So this is an iconic cover by Roger McGowan too. Let's mention that. So this is you get what it says on the tin here. It's Panzer Blitz on the West Front. So if you love Panzer Blitz, get this. This is another one where it's going to be difficult to find it in good condition. Doug says that this fixed the biggest problems of Panzer Blitz. And that might be true. And you can see a quote unquote new copy. Now you look at the description, it's like, yes, I took a dump in the box, but I'm still listing it as new for some reason, and I want 129 for it. Poop not included. So I'm not sure what's up without criticizing this particular guy's listing. I don't know. But you do have to actually look at the listings to verify that the listed condition actually makes sense, because sometimes it does not. A lot of people like Panzer Blitz better. Patrick of Patrick's Tactics and Tutorials. So that reminds me to mention again that the Armchair Dragoons Digital Convention is coming up on MLK weekend. There's a link to their Wargame events calendar in the video description, and to the earlier in the chat there is a link to the actual sign up page. For those unable to make it to Winter Offensive to play GCACW in person and who have already tried to absorb Patrick's stuff, we will be doing a live play, teach and play for the Armchair Dragoons Digital Convention. So check the calendar on that. So this is the kind of thing Brant mentions. Brant mentions that 1 year at Origins, Steve Busey and somebody had a massive Panzer Leader game set up with a division on each side, 3 boards by 5 boards. So this is the kind of thing that you could very easily do with either Panzer Leader or Panzer Blitz, or presumably Arab-Israeli Wars, but I'm not sure I've ever heard of it being done with Arab-Israeli Wars. And hey, Patrick, go ahead and run your own. You'll do it better than I will. I'm not backing out, but I'm sure Brant will be happy to add a second session to the calendar. So you could easily kit bash a scenario together and stick multiple copies of these games together and just play out giant divisional things. The bottleneck you hit is the boards, because unless you had variant boards, which did exist and people are still making now, then you'd pretty swiftly run out of interesting things to do on the original boards that came with these things. But you can mix and match them too. So you could easily play, Panzer Blitz on the Panzer Leader boards that would present essentially no particular challenges. So another all-time classic, fabulous, iconic cover from Roger McGowan. Napoleon. This game has a long history. It was originally released. So this is a Tom Douglas game, and designers BGG lists are Tom, Ron Gibson, and Lance Guteridge. And without a copy of the original, I'm unwilling to say that those folks are not involved in the design of this. But I think of this as a Tom Douglas game. This is one of the first block war games. Okay, it's not the first, but it's really early, and you can tell because one of the listed publishers here is Gamma 2. Gamma 2 is the company that evolved into or was changed into overnight Columbia Games. Okay, this was published by them. It went to Avalon Hill, where it stayed for quite a while, and then went back to throughout whatever machinations occurred. Went back to Columbia, where it was kickstarted in a new fancy fourth edition. That's this one from 2013, which, as I recall, was quite successful. And I believe that edition is still available today. Um, when I have a question about, hey, I've never encountered this Napoleonic game before, I go and ask Jim Ozarski about it. And Jim speaks extremely highly of this game. And I frankly trust his judgment on most matters Napoleonic, while acknowledging that our tastes do not have 100% overlap in terms of approach and detail and all that stuff. There's another channel that's doing Panzer Blitz content too. Perfidious Albion mentions the site rep page on YouTube. And for some reason, I am subscribed to that Panzer Leader person on my regular me channel, not the Ardwulf channel that is normally reserved for like cooking and science videos. So not that are done by me. I just watch stuff on that channel. The only things that have been uploaded to that channel were uploaded by accident, were uploaded years and years ago, or were uploaded as tests at some point to see if I actually understood how to upload videos to YouTube. It's been a while. Jim says if you're going for this game, get the fourth edition. I have seen the components; they are super duper nice. But you can see the, so here's an Avalon Hill edition of it with a tiny thumbnail. And this is the cover I remember from Avalon Hill. But then it went back to Columbia from 1993, and it's a slightly different cover, but it's definitely hitting the same beats, if you know what I mean. Fucko, I did say it's a different Dave Clark, so it's not my fault his name's Dave Clark. But yeah, I think if you're going for this, go for the new one. It's really nice. Columbia Games is worth supporting anyway. So, next up is Kingmaker, another all-time classic. Designer Andrew McNeil. This originally came out of Ariel, I believe. There's multiple listed publishers here. I believe Ariel was the original, and the original Ariel edition, I believe, goes for large amounts of cabbage. Brant, I'm blaming you that you have scared Jim away from actually running Napoleonic events for that. Stuka Joe, welcome to the stream. Good to have you here as always. Says that the blocks in the Avalon Hill version are engraved. I believe that's correct. I don't think I've ever handled those in person. I would be very curious to see what the quality was like on those, to be completely honest. Nevertheless, I'm at some level, I'm just fine with the stickers. So I will, I'll defer to Jim on this. Kingmaker. This is a fabulous cover too, by the way. I don't know if this is I wonder who did the cover. Let me put it that way. Artists credited here are Don Greenwood, W. Scott Moores, Philmar Limited, Randall Reed, plus 3 more. Jesus, there's a lot of artists there. Mick Ohl is in there. Tom Shaw is in there twice. This is a great all-time classic. My concerns playing this now would be along the lines of how long it takes to play for what you're getting out of the experience. I believe this probably takes longer than I think a game of its kind ought to. Bill Post Scratcher, first of all, welcome to the stream. Thanks for coming by. Mark McNair said he kickstarted the new edition of Kingmaker. And then Mickey Joof says that there will be a Kickstarter for a new edition. So I'm a little confused now other than that. So apparently it already happened back in the fall per Brant. So thank you, Brant, for that clarification. Raised over 100 pounds, 100K pounds, I mean to say. The pound is very strong right now. I don't know if you guys know. Yeah, all-time classic. There are a number of re-implementations of similar games. Either like, Kingmaker Plus type things, which I'm personally aware of at least one of those projects from a guy I know that's doing that. Or complete re-envisionings along the lines of Crown of Roses from GMT, which is a game I have played and which I am absolutely sure there is a really good game there, but it does take some effort to coax it out. So Kingmaker, another all-time Avalon Hill classic, and a game I believe is worth our time today. This is the Uni Games, I think, TM Games Edition cover. I like the Avalon Hill cover quite a bit better. I'm not sure this cover makes any sense because this is a little more medieval than the I think that is justified by the actual period of this game, which is the Wars of the Roses. Chancellorsville Second Edition. So we talked about this last time. This is the Randall Reed revision of Chancellorsville, and apparently it is a substantially different game. I am not sure which of the two games I have seen a copy of with the Mondo thick counters off the top of my head. Not exactly elaborate counters, but do you want elaborate counters for a game like this? I'm not sure that you do. Not a super duper fondly remembered Avalon Hill classic, to be completely honest, in either of its editions. Jeff Beeler says they used to kill all the heirs and declare a republic and then go to the pub. This makes complete sense to me. Greg Mugan, welcome to the stream. Says the Kingmaker has his favorite game review on BGG. You'll know it when you find it. So that's worth a hunt right there, I believe. Here's the Black Magic Ritual Kit. Just because I'm curious. Price history on this. It has gone never. So this was in a Witchcraft Ritual Kit. Now I'm curious to see if this thing actually goes on Board Game Geek. And there's no reason to suspect that it would, because it's not really a game. This is another one of these just weird nutso ideas that Avalon Hill had. I mean, like TSR and their embroidery kits, for example. I mean, they were TSR hobbies after all, so why not have embroidery kits? That went poorly. Basketball strategy, credited to Don Greenwood, according to our friends at Board Game Geek. Each player has an identical generic team to coach through a game. So that's interesting. And I think isn't going to appeal to the same sort of people that play like Stratomatic baseball and stuff, but probably makes it considerably better as a, say, tournament game. And I don't know that basketball strategy is something that is getting played nowadays at, say, WBC. Maybe it is. I don't know. Oh, here we go. Next up is a Randall Reed game. For years, I thought this was a Mark McLaughlin game. It is not. It is a Randall Reed game, 1776. This is a game that, considering its year of release, looks, at least the map, looks considerably better than one would expect this early. This is an absolutely, it's actually really super high resolution. Okay, hold on. So this obviously only covers the U.S. East Coast. And it's got that honeycomb map pattern, which is not a thing that I particularly favor. However, this game was released in like 1974. So given that, I actually think this looks quite nice. This uses a system that is quite similar to the system used in War and Peace, which is a Mark McLaughlin game. And therefore, I think this is worth your time. Particularly if you want a hex and counter game on the American Revolution that covers the whole thing, that is a thing that doesn't really come out very often anymore. We've got a number of excellent American Revolution games, including things like Liberty or Death. War for America from Gilbert Collins looks good to me. I've heard some complaints about the rule book, but there were also people paying rapt attention to Gilbert at Compass Expo as he taught it. So I guess that could be good. I mean, one could take that as a good sign or a bad sign. This did, as Doug points out, come up during the, as the actual bicentennial of 1976 was approaching. Is a pretty well-received game. I don't think this is necessarily an all-time classic, but I like it, and I think it is worth your time. Doug says he thinks that We the People is a better game. Yeah, I always have trouble mentally going over in my head which one is We the People and which one is For the People. And I mean, the names make sense, but it's very easy to conflate those. in your head. Now, um, like I said, though, there's not a lot of hex and counter stuff in this space. Fucko points out that it came out 5 years before One Piece, which is totally correct. Sean Sullivan, welcome to the stream, says it is a great game but needs tinkering. And Gen Chaos 33 and somebody else mentioned End of Empire, which is a redo of an older game that was released in a relatively recent edition, which is now sold out from Compass, and was actually on my list of things to get at Compass Expo, but it unfortunately was gone by then. That actually it doesn't just cover the American Revolution, it covers a bunch of stuff. And there is a robust community of hardcore fans of that who have created additional scenarios set in colonial North America. So that game, End of Empire, actually does look really very interesting. But We the People got redone as Washington's War. So that adds additional confusion. That's a different cover. For the People got redone, but they still called it For the People. So, like I said, I have to think about which one is which every time I talk about it. I know which one is which. I have played both of them, but just the names confuse me. That may be why they renamed We the People into Washington's War. There could be a host of other reasons, but that might be why. 1776, like I said, not necessarily the greatest game on this subject, but it is one of the better hex and counter games on this subject, and I think it's worthwhile. It was one that I had made a point to get again. Let me put it that way, and where it sits now up here somewhere. Tobruk by Harold Hawk. If I hadn't said so, this peach and pecan beer is really kind of weird. It's not bad, it's just weird. Okay, Tobruk is the original Blazing Dice Fest. This is a classic. It is, I think, a game that does not hold up particularly well today. There are people who will disagree with that, including all the people that love the advanced Tobruk system from Critical Hit. Those folks, I admit to the streak of masochism because we're playing Goss right now, but those folks are more masochistic than me. And yes, as Bill Post-Scratcher mentions, the appeal of Tobruk was kind of taken over by Squad Leader. So this is a classic. A lot of people played it back in the day. I don't think it's necessarily it's certainly not the worst game anybody's ever seen, but it's also, I think you can do better nowadays. I mean, I think you might be better served by GMT's Panzer nowadays if this is the kind of thing that you want. It is a dice fest. It is a dice pool mechanic of some kind where you're just throwing dice and dice and dice and dice. I'm not sure it's a dice pool mechanic now that I think about it, but it's a dice after dice after dice after dice thing. And the consensus nowadays seems to be that it is quite tedious. 1776, those formation cards also get used later as an option in War and Peace. Stellar Conquest, designed by Howard Thompson. So this originated with Metagaming as a one of their larger format games, as I recall, and eventually made its way to Avalon Hill. This is the Metagaming First Edition. Cover sheet, large format, 12.5 by 9.5. Interesting. Artwork by Frank Kelly Frias. That's interesting on its own. And then they did a second edition, and it's a baggie. Okay. So I played the Avalon Hill edition, okay, back in the day, and I really liked this game. This is the obvious predecessor of GMT's Space Empires 4X, which I also like a lot. It is spreadsheetier than Space Empires 4X. There is some bookkeeping in Space Empires 4X. There is more bookkeeping here, but a lot of the beats that Space Empires 4X does are done here first. I think the design of Space Empires 4X is better refined. It plays cleaner. It plays faster. There's less bookkeeping, and it is a more focused game. in that the players are more clearly driven to direct conflict faster than they necessarily are in Stellar Conquest. If you like Space 4X games, that is what this is. This is a true Space 4X game. I loved it back in the day. I generally had problems getting my friends playing it because they said it was like keeping score for bowling. There is some truth to that argument. But I really liked this game. I loved the exploration aspect. I remain a fan of it to this day. That said, uh, do I if I found a cheap copy of the Avalon Hill version, I would grab it. I would probably prefer to play Space Empires 4X at this time. To be completely honest about it. But I remain very fond of Stellar Conquest. It is not a game that I think necessarily will appeal to everybody because it is very bookkeepy, and if you don't like bookkeeping, you're gonna probably not like that. But I liked it. I don't mind bookkeeping. I kind of like bookkeeping. So it appealed to me. Mo from Mo's Game Table is here. Mo, thanks for stopping by. Um, Freddie the Great. Okay, so the credit here is Edward Curran and Frank Davis. I am not sure what the details are of that credit. I would probably my solution to that question would be I would ask Frank at this point. This is a game that is very highly regarded. I will tell you that. This originated with SPI, eventually made its way to Avalon Hill. The Avalon Hill components, this is not always true, by the way. It is not always true that the Avalon Hill components are just better. In this case, I believe they are. In the case of this and in the case of Conquistador, I think they are. In the case of a game that we will get to soonish, I think they are not. I think the SPI components are better quality. All the art design is the same, right? So here's the map. You can see the characteristic Redmond Simonson touch here. It is a map that does a great deal with not very much to work with. And you can also see all the charts and stuff on the map. I have this. This is one of only 3 games that I am willing to put up with the SPI, the miserable SPI flat tray for. There's probably 1 or 2 others that I don't have, but this is one of the 3 that are currently in the collection that I think are worth it. Even I'm actually in the market for an Avalon Hill version, but when I buy Avalon Hill games, I tend to demand that they be unpunched because their counters tend to have center nibs, and I don't like center nibs. And if I'm going to punch center nib counters, then I want to cut them out of the sheet myself. Mark Hodgkinson mentions that Kerry Anderson makes new pieces for Frederick the Great. Yeah, so a lot of these games, somewhere you can get new revised pieces. Those are particularly nice. But this is a game that I think is worth our time. I don't know that I'd call it an all-time classic, but I think it's worth our time today. Next up is Caesar's Legions. Credit on this is interesting too. Don Greenwood and the late Lauren Wiseman. Lauren Wiseman was one of the founders of GDW. Passed away a few years ago. Is probably better remembered for his contributions to Traveller, but nevertheless was integral in the early years of GDW. And this is certainly as wargaming a wargame as you're going to wargame. Caesar's Legions is very interesting because let's see if there's a good shot of the map. You'd think there would be for this Avalon Hill game of this age. So this is like operational ancients, right? And boy, there's not a lot in that space. Operational ancients is a space that is very seldom touched by designers. For that reason, this sounds quite interesting to me. This isn't one that I've played. This isn't one that I've ever owned. And frankly, I think this cover is very purple. And I'm not sure what whoever put that together was. Does it say? No. I don't. That does not look like a Roger McGowan cover. Let me put it that way. But the game looks pretty interesting, and as an operational ancients game, that's got to be interesting by itself. Now, how it holds up as a game, that's a great question. But is this worth running down? I think we can see that it doesn't go for a million dollars. Like new copy for $50, I'd consider that a bit high, but I'm fundamentally a cheapskate, so that could be why. Um, Perfidious Albion says that it's very difficult for the Germans unless you can draw presumably the Romans into the forests, or if you focus on destroying the auxiliaries. I would imagine that's part of the trick. Jeff Beeler says that Lauren Wiseman wanted this game back. Good luck with that, considering this presumably resides with Hasbro now, which is unfortunate. All these games that are languishing in the IP vaults of Hasbro it's unfortunate. If there's a market for it, I'd just as soon see the thing in print with somebody else. The Beat Inflation strategy game. This sounds like another one of Avalon Hill's weird trend tie-ins. Description says arguably one of their least successful designs. Alan Strand and Ken Strand, not a pair of individuals I am familiar with. Somebody wants 50 euros for it in wherever this is, Italy. An overinflated game. Okay, well, it's in beat inflation. So this is the kind of finance game that doesn't look very good. So Adam Misnick, thanks Adam for joining. Much appreciated. Says that the Avalon Hill version added additional scenarios, and there was more material in the general. Okay, this is why I often, but not always, prefer the Avalon Hill edition, because there's either a little bit of additional material, or there are options that have counters, as in the case of Conquistador in the Avalon Hill version, where you did not get the counters in the original SPI version. Yes, as Brad points out, Beat Inflation just cost too much, so nobody bought it. This is inexplicably listed as a standalone thing in BGG. It's an expansion for Avalon Hill's Alexander, which we've already talked about. So we're just going to blow through that. This is the Wargamer's Guide to Panzerblitz. It is exactly what it sounds like. It is a book of supporting material for Panzerblitz that does not fit in the Panzerblitz box. So if you're a big Panzerblitz fan, you probably want that. John Edwards' War at Sea. This is another very influential design that we are now seeing a bunch of shoutbacks at, including the Admiral's War from Canvas Temple is basically an expansion of this and Victory in the Pacific, which is a related system. This is a classic. I think that War at this is the earlier of the two games between this and Victory in the Pacific. And this is a very influential game. I played Victory in the Pacific and then said to myself, wow, the influence of this on Empire of the Sun is obvious. And it is. And that influence originates here with War at Sea. I do think that of the two, Victory in the Pacific is a far more interesting game. And that is just got to do with the fact that it is a more interesting naval situation in the Pacific than one has in the Battle of the Atlantic, in my opinion. So unless you have a specific special interest in the Bismarck or the Hood or the Ark Royal or whatever, or of stuff that was going on in the European theater, then of the two, I'd go with Victory in the Pacific. Or Admiral's War, that's fine too. UFO. This is another one that originated with Gamma 2, Tom Douglas design. I don't know a whole lot about this other than it's got a weird spacey board and traditional Avalon Hill dice. I still have a few of those. I have a lot fewer of those Avalon Hill dice than I would think that I would have. Hydaspes we just skipped because it's a general article and not an actual game. So if you need an expansion for Alexander, it's on BGG. And if you look under Alexander, you should see it, hopefully. Low complexity abstract game themed on an alien invasion. Okay. I don't know that I think this looks particularly interesting, but it is, 1976, and we didn't know that much then. So, Submarine, this is classic. Originated again from Battle Line, came over with Steve Peak and S. Craig Taylor. This is, of those games, this is one I haven't played and don't really know a lot about. And I am not traditionally a naval game person. So it is easy for me to kind of discount this. But I think, as we can see, it's not unclear as to whether that is physical pieces or vassal. This is physical pieces, however. Um, I would be willing to investigate this. Bill Postscratcher says that it is the best ever on its topic. And Stuka Joe says that it is underwater accounting. Both of those things could potentially be true. Perfidious Albion says, wonders if it was based on the old TV show. I wouldn't necessarily assume that, just based on the similarity in title. Very detailed, I absolutely buy. Here is, oh, wow, okay, multiplayer, multi-blind game of Submarine at Pacificon in 2010. So this is serious. Almost all of these battle line games designed by Steve Peak or S. Craig Taylor are worth a look nowadays. I don't know that this is one that is really well remembered, but apparently there's plenty of folks that did in fact enjoy it. Clark Commander 1983 says he loves it too. Old Lady Play says that it is a great game for introverts because you never have to look at each other. I mean, that's cool too. Starship Troopers by Randall C. Reed tie into the Robert Heinlein novel. I don't really want to get into talking about the Heinlein novel because I could probably do that for a good 20 minutes. The game's pretty good. This came out in roughly the same few year period as Star Soldier from SPI, and of the two, I have said in the past that I think this is the better game. This is more setting specific, though, right? You got the humans, the bugs, and the skinnies, and you can play out on this kind of weird looking, not really ugly, but kind of weird looking map. Low res PGG posts. This actually looks like a shot from Vassal. But this is a fairly interesting game. It's an interesting exploration of how to wargame the ideas about combat in the future that Robert Heinlein talks about in the book. And it might be of interest strictly for that. This goes for not $1 million. Somebody's selling a like new copy for $35 on BGG. That seems like a pretty good price to me. $35 for Starship Troopers. All right. Here's one that is another one I could probably talk about for 20 minutes. This is Panzergruppe Guderian. This is a Jim Dunnigan design, originated with SPI as a magazine game, was later released by them as a boxed game, was later than that picked up by Avalon Hill and re-released with this cover, which is a Roger McGowan cover. This is one of the most influential war games of all time, and it's another one that I think holds up pretty well today as a game on its own merits. And is also another of those games that I think it is important for wargamers to play at least once. Maybe you can say that you didn't like it. And certainly there are other games that have developed these ideas, that are more recent treatments than this. This is the genesis of the entire variable combat system thing that, saw further development in Victory in the West and in Operation Typhoon. Some of those ideas originated here. Those ideas are still around here. This is a very important game. It's also a pretty good situation. This is Smolensk around 1940, right? If you're familiar with Smolensk got Barbarossa derailed for us, yes, basically the same type of situation. This still gets played occasionally. I am pleased to report. I think it should probably be played more, and I would love to see somebody redo this game. Why, where this is right now, I don't know. It could be with Hasbro, and that might be the problem. But there are plenty of other successor games that that follow on to this. In fact, Tony Burkett's East Front Battles series, that's starting to maybe in 2023 hit the shelves in from Decision Games, also shouts back to Panzergruppe Guderian as a huge influence. So very important game. Everybody should play this at least once. Conquistador. John Launcher says SCS-ish. I don't know that I'd say that. I think the signature achievement. I mean, yes, in an absolute sense, and that there's a lot of common characteristics, but those same common characteristics are shared by a million other games. I wouldn't specifically compare it to SCS. Conquistador, this is Richard Berg design, originally appeared in S&T, was later released by SPI. I'm not sure. I know they did a flat version. Doesn't appear that they did a boxed box version. Then went to Avalon Hill. This is one I had back in the 80s. I liked it at the time. In retrospect, I think that it is a very, I'm going to use this term to signify both the good and the bad of what this term means. It is a very, very Bergian design. Okay. It has all of the characteristic idiosyncrasies of Richard Berg as a designer. I think it's a fascinating topic. I think not probably. I think it doesn't treat the topic in the level of the detail that we would like it to. But you're limited to. I mean, it was originally a magazine game, right? So there is a. I'm thinking of a different song. But I think this is a pretty interesting game. It is one of the. So the magazine game had an optional rules for, I think, German explorers and Dutch traders or something like that. And the Avalon Hill version gives you the counters for those. The magazine game did not. It is on Avalon Hill mounted map board in the period when Avalon Hill was doing a very shitty job at mounted map boards. We're out of focus somehow. Let's get back in focus, camera. Are we back in focus? No, we're not. Okay, that usually does the trick. There we go. Hopefully the light's good. If the light's not good, somebody mentioned. I asked this before, but nobody said anything, so I assume it's great. This goes for like new copy for $23. This is the same person that was doing it before. If that's legitimate like new, this is a very good price. Does it say that is the Avalon Hill edition? There's a lot of superficial history in my concern with games like this is that the history will be superficialized, and I absolutely think it is in this game. That said, I liked it as a kid, and I ran it down as a grown up man. So I have it and unpunched, and I haven't punched it yet because again, Center Nib's got to punch it out with a razor knife. It would be very interesting for somebody to redo this game now, but it would be a very different game if somebody were to do that, as I think evidenced by the Conquistadors, which came out for Compass a couple years ago. Caesar, the Epic Battle of Alesia. This is another like non-classic that is nevertheless, those people who have played it that I've talked to speak very highly of this. Stuka Joe says that presumably, speaking of Conquistador, works well as a multiplayer game. That's absolutely right. It's also quite asymmetrical, actually, in a very non-intentional way. But it actually and to the point that it's not a well balanced game. Let me put it that way. But it does work well and is asymmetrical. Bill Postscratcher says that this Caesar Epic Battle of Alesia is the best of the old Avalon Hill games. I've never played this. I have the GBOH game on this topic. So this is a battle about which we know depressingly little because our primary source about it is Caesar himself. It isn't even clear exactly where the site of this battle is in modern France. There's debate about where it actually happened. But essentially, there's a bunch of Gauls hiding up in a hill fort. Vercingetorix is in the hill fort. The Romans lay siege to the hill fort, and a much larger Gallic army shows up to attack the Romans, and the Romans build their own fort around their siege, and then they are both the besiegers and the besieged. Absolutely unique battle as far as I'm concerned. And it is a very interesting topic. And this game is supposed to be very good and also should play pretty well multiplayer, as will the GBOH version of the game. Air Force. All right, this is another one from Madeline, another S. Craig Taylor game. So this is another one of those games that if somebody were designing this today, you'd end up with a game that looks dramatically different from this. By all, now I have this, although I have the Avalon Hill version and not the Battle Line version. So Battle Line did Air Force and then Dauntless and then an Air Force expansion kit. And somewhere in there, they included some stuff that never got released in the Avalon Hill version. Avalon Hill released Air Force and Dauntless, but at that point, Dauntless was an expansion rather than a standalone, and they never did the expansion kit as far as I know. What level of changes exist between the Battle Line and Avalon Hill versions? I am not sure. This is a quite detailed thing, but it's mechanically quite neat. I mean, there's a reason why, after getting a copy of Dauntless, I looked at it and said, "Huh, this looks neat. I should get Air Force." And I did, and it contained another copy of Dauntless, which is why I sold my extra copy of Dauntless. Um, I have no doubt that there's issues with this, but it nevertheless looks pretty neat. So at some point, it is on my to-do list to get Air Force played at some point. I do have it. It is not going anywhere. I have the Dauntless stuff too. Stuka Joe says accounting in the skies, which I believe is an accurate statement. So this is something called War at Sea 2. And this is another thing that absolutely bafflingly has its own Board Game Geek entry, because what this is a series of articles about War at Sea, expanding War at Sea, that were published in the General. So I don't know that any of this ever got produced as a thing. Why this is a standalone thing, I don't know. This apparently somebody did print the War at Sea 2 map up, which looks like it was done by me. And I don't know that this necessarily warrants a BGG entry. Let me put it that way. Apparently, the War at Sea 2 in Countermix included Italian Frogman, which by itself is very interesting. Vincent Stella says that he visited the actual battlefield in France, and the commonly accepted battlefield has gained recent credibility from filtered aerial photography. So that is a thing that can happen. And I hope they figure it out, because the archaeology there should be amazing, right? So next up is another classic. This one, it well rises to the status of classic, I believe, with one reservation, which I'll tell you, and it's the same reservation I have about a lot of these Avalon Hill games. And that is that it really takes longer to play than I think it should. But this is a classic, very influential, very good game. And I think the better of the two, not system wise necessarily, but simply because the mechanics that one gets in these games is more interesting in the Pacific. So Victory in the Pacific is a winner, well worth your time. Cheap copies appear to be available, and like new copy available in Canadian for $90. I think that sounds a bit rich. Not all, but a lot of these were in print for 15, 20 years. There's tons of copies of them. Bucko says the maps and the counters were done by Avalon Hill. Was that something released in the General then as an actual thing, a pull-out thing? Because the map doesn't look particularly impressive. But then again, it's the mid 70s, so what do you want, right? But in any case, Victory in the Pacific is worth your time. It's another one that is a classic, is still played today, and is another of those experiences that I think wargamers ought to have. Victory at Sea. Okay, this is a combines War at Sea and Victory in the Pacific. Although it is advisable to use War at Sea 2, yay. Okay, so this is, again, why this is its own BGG entry, I'm not sure, but it is. And okay, you can play the whole war, or you could just get Admiral's War from Canvas Temple if it is. This was sold separately. There's no version information on BGG on this. And there's nobody on the geek market for this. Bill Post Scratcher said you should be able to find for $20 or $30. Play copy, absolutely. If you want a really good condition copy of Victory in the Pacific, you might pay 50, $60. I feel like 80 or 90 is too much. I'm not really sure we have to talk a lot about Squad Leader, okay? This is massively influential, changed the face of wargaming. John Hill design obviously continues in its form of Advanced Squad Leader today. iconic cover. Everything about this game is iconic. The early printings, possibly just the first one, but maybe a couple of the later ones too, were this absolutely weird purple box. Not sure what anybody was thinking, but the gradient orange of the later box is the one that became really iconic. It is an amazing Roger McGowan cover. It is a classic game. It was rated relatively highly in complexity in back in the day, but I believe that Old Lady Play says 90 Canadian is about 60 or 65 US dollars, and maybe that's not quite as bad. Um, I got a bunch of people saying Squad Leader, what's that? Never heard of it. As high as this was rated in complexity back in the day, that's another one of those things where I think you look at it now and it doesn't seem as complex as they maybe said it was. Now there's a bunch of expansions which we will get to, maybe at least some. We appear to have time. We're moving relatively briskly. I'm trying to move fast. Um, this is fantastic. This is news you can use here, folks. But thank you, Wade Moore, for that chuckle. Damn, just a little frog in the throat here. The I think the big shift here is the loss of control over your troops, right? That is a thing that had been done in miniatures before, but I think this is one of the first implementations of that idea in wargaming, and it's the one that I think had the most impact. So all-time classic. Another thing with the complexity, with the illusion of complexity here, is that this uses explicit programmed learning, which means that they give you some really simple scenarios at first, and then they gradually introduce more concepts. Now, the problem with that is that some of those early scenarios aren't really very good to play anymore after you've played scenario 10. You're probably not going to go back and do scenario 2, which is one of the reasons why they started putting out more scenarios for Squad Leader, right? And they did that even back in the Squad Leader day. Rail Baron. It's a train game, one of the earlier train games, board games with railroad theme. I'm not quite sure it's quite that early, but it's, early-ish, with a really very uninspired cover, and a map that is a point-to-point map of the United States, right? I mean, it's a rail game, so that shouldn't surprise anybody. Mark, boy, that's a nice prize there. A purple box Squad Leader signed by John Hill. Wow. Okay. I mean, that's an amazing piece right there. I don't really know anything about Rail Baron, so we're just gonna move along. Anybody has any wisdom about Rail Baron, please put it in the chat. Pacific Origins. So this was another one that I don't think should be its own BGG entry, but whatever. This is a variant in the general of Origins of World War II, which is a game we talked about last time, which is the Pacific, right? I'd be very curious to see this, but not sufficiently interested to go run down a copy, but you can absolutely go find copies on the internet of old issues of the general. Jeff Mueller says his favorite part of Squad Leader was the leaders' names. Yes, a lot of whom were obviously people that worked on the game. Jeff, thanks so much. Much appreciated. Guy I was hanging out with earlier is one of those people, actually, with his name on an ASL in this case. Machiavelli, S. Craig Taylor, and James B. Wood. This is... So one of these games, and I don't think it was this one, is basically diplomacy on a different map. And this might be that one, actually. And there's been, I think there was a different edition of this too. Aaliyah magazine contains 7 new scenarios. Okay. No, that's the original map that I remember anyway. It looks like it might be a diplomacy like. Now, I have played Empire Builder, and for what it's worth, I have enjoyed Empire Builder several times. And kind of part of the joy of Empire Builder is drawing your own rail net, right? So I don't know. I don't know if I would like that, but I'm not that big a train game guy that I'm going to need to experience that. I do not anticipate ever playing Rail Baron. Okay, so we have confirmation in the chat from several people, including Ed and Doug and Mickey, all of which say that it was basically a variant of Diplomacy. Meandering Mike says that it's much better than Diplomacy. So I believe we have already covered Diplomacy in the last show, and Diplomacy is a classic. It's another one that we should all try, so that we can have experienced it. It's not a game I particularly like. I'm not social enough to enjoy Diplomacy, and that's what it's about. I mean, the rules could fit on an index card, and you could teach it to somebody in 3 minutes, and the entire rest of the game, the entire point of the game, is the negotiation, right? If you are that kind of player, then you will probably love Diplomacy. I am not that kind of player. I like math. So I generally I have played it. I was not a particular fan of it. It is a great game, a classic game. I'm good on it, so I don't need to pursue it any further. Hexagony is an abstract strategy game that I do not care about. Designed by Ken Hodgkinson, alternate name Binfa. Originally published by the designer as Binfa under the name Taoist Arts. Okay. I vaguely remember this. I mean, in the sense of seeing it in the catalog. The problem with getting reprints of these things is that, by and large, the rights are going to be owned by Hasbro, and nobody wants a piece of that legal department action. Okay. Are there ways around it? Yes, but nobody really wants to go through this. Very few people want to go through the trouble of having a conversation with Hasbro's legal department. All right, this is Gettysburg 77. This is, I believe, the version of the game that Gilbert Collins has done video on, and which looks to me like it holds up fairly well today as a pretty simple game. Now, I believe there's a basic, intermediate, and an advanced game. My further understanding is that the basic game is too basic, the intermediate game is just right, and the advanced game is not worth your time. I believe that to be an accurate statement. But there's been, a different version of this. Every different version of this is its own basic redesign. I mean, this is not the same game as Gettysburg 58, right? Fury in the West. This is another one that came from Battle Line, and it is one of the few. Let's see if there's a picture. There is. This is one of the few that was published by Battle Line in the traditional Battle Line box, with a cover that is the type of cover we don't see very often anymore, or it's a photograph. And then was redone by Avalon Hill in a standard Avalon Hill bookcase box with a very nice cover, I might add, which I believe to be a Roger McGowan cover. This is supposed to be pretty good. I haven't played this. This is Shiloh, so it is a tactical game. The map is not gorgeous, shall we say, but, you get what you get. And it's got these interesting rectangular counters and then separate artillery counters and stuff like that. So obviously it's an interesting battle. It's interesting from a component standpoint because of the rectangular pieces in addition to square pieces. This is supposed to be pretty good. It's not a classic. This is Flat Top, S. Craig Taylor. This is, I believe I have said, this is a pretty high complexity game. I think, again, it looks less complicated now than it did at the time. And I think that's because we're more used to complicated games in the wargaming space nowadays. So Scott Bell says that advanced Gettysburg 77 was fantastic, and that brigades had battle lines like later CWB. The map needed to be bigger. Yeah, so that's the problem, right? I mean, if you have it makes the scale wrong for the game, and I think that's a huge problem and mistake. Now, on the other hand, it's not a critical mistake in the case of that particular game, since there is still a perfectly viable game in the box. So Stuka Joe says that in Fury of the West, you have attrition every time you move because your guys get lost in the woods and you have to wait for them to return to the unit. That sounds interesting. The Stigler bat symbol, possibly. So Flat Top is, I believe, to be my favorite Avalon Hill game today. At the time, I probably would have said that game was Stellar Conquest or Squad Leader or maybe Freedom in the Galaxy. Nowadays, it is Flat Top. I think Flat Top is a fabulous game. It has a ton of hidden information. It is uh, you can always solitaire games, okay? There's nothing that says you in the book where the solitaire police will come over if you try to solitaire Flat Top or Victor Games Vietnam or whatever. But this game is not at its best in solitaire mode, okay? So I would consider this to be as close to at the very bottom. If we have a rating of 1 to 7 or 1 to 9 for solitaire suitability, this gets a 1. It gets a 1. And frankly, Victory Games Vietnam is maybe a 2, and I believe GMT rates it as such for their new edition of it. So there's tons of hidden information. You have to basically find the enemy. It is fantastic. It can be run out of the box, and the game itself does a lot of the double blind referee work for you, but it is even better played double blind with a referee and 2 tables and 3 maps and all that stuff. It is a fantastic game that I have the very highest regard for. Freedom of the Galaxy was SPI. We're going to get to it pretty shortly, I believe. Was SPI, was later picked up by Avalon Hill. So we will discuss that. Thank you, old lady, please. Next is Elric. So I think this was a cooperative endeavor with Chaosium. And in fact, it uses the same map art as Chaosium's Stormbringer RPG. So what this is a board game based on the novels by Michael Moorcock, the Elric books specifically. And bear in mind that he's written a bunch of them in the years since, and even some relatively recent. I think there was a new Elric book that came out just like last year or the year before. So if you're really into that, then you can go check that out. I gotta say that this Hobby Japan edition is really, really cool looking. As was often the case with the Hobby Japan versions or the some of the Japanese versions of some of these games were really striking. This was also published by Chaosium. I'm pretty sure this predates the Avalon Hill edition. I actually like this cover better than the Avalon Hill cover, which is in sort of this magenta and, it's got a sort of pastelish look that I don't really like, but which is actually appropriate to the source material, I have to say. So I've never played this. I'm curious as to what it goes for on the secondary market. New copy from Switzerland for $60. I think that's pretty reasonable. Only copies in the United States are average and good. I don't think this is particularly ruinously expensive. I like the original books or the earlier books that I read back in the 80s, I guess. So I wouldn't mind trying this, but it's not a thing on my wish list. Like I want to track it down. It's got like a lot of weird little fantasy pieces and stuff like that, big counters and small counters. So interesting game, but for me, it's more a curiosity because it is a fantasy game and not a historical game. Arab-Israeli Wars, number 3 in the unofficial trilogy that was Panzer Blitz, Panzer Leader, and Arab-Israeli Wars. So this is platoon level combat in the Arab-Israeli Wars. As an Arab-Israeli Wars topic game, I'm like, nope, I'm not getting into this. Nope, I don't want to buy books on the Arab-Israeli Wars. And I'm going to break that promise with BCS, but that's because BCS is now one of my favorite systems. So I am cool with letting people who enjoy Arab-Israeli Wars at the platoon level have all the copies of this. Alpha Omega. This is another sci-fi game. This came out of Battle Line, Sean Hayes and Steve Peak. I don't know a lot about these. Players assume the roles of the commanders of the Human, Drove, and Rylish space fleets. I've always had the impression this is a fairly abstract strategy game, but then I look at the map and that makes me think that I was completely wrong about this. This looks much like a space war game than an abstract strategy game with a thin veneer of sci-fi on it. And again, for titles that Steve Peak or S. Craig Taylor were involved in, I think that these are probably worth a look, but I wouldn't go spend a pile of money on it either. Air Assault on Crete. This is a pretty interesting and well-remembered game, but it's also quite heavy, both physically and rules-wise. Contains a lot of stuff and contains an entire bonus game, Assault on Malta, and I believe that map is mounted as well. So there's a lot here. Design credits according to BGG are Vance von Boris and Randall Reed. Again, I'm not sure what who did what there without having the book to look at. This is one I've never owned, never played. It's well remembered. Let me put it that way. Perfidious Albion says that Arab-Israeli war is worth it if you're a fan of Panzerblitz, a Panzer Leader, just for the updated rulebook. Now that I find completely a completely logical statement. Tim Zale says this, presumably meaning Air Assault on Crete, is another one of the favorite Avalon Hill games, and I think you are not alone there. This isn't exactly incredibly well regarded nowadays, but a like new copy for $42 sounds pretty decent to me. It's a heavy, thorny game, and I think maybe folks weren't ready for that back in 1977. I don't know, maybe not this heavy. Source of the Now. It's another one of these games that, again, if it gets redone nowadays, it's going to look like a completely different thing. Witness, what's it called? Heart of Darkness from Legion Wargames, which I believe is a Kim Kanger game. It's a new take on this same idea. Ross Maker, Dave Wesley. Dave Wesley, very important individual in the history of hobby gaming, by the way. Maybe we'll talk about that at some point. Again, this is a game that does not do the history justice, but it is nevertheless a fun game to play. And again, solos very well. And I'll also point out that this is not an Avalon Hill original. This originated with Discovery Games, and I think they actually did an expansion for it too. Source of the Nile Tributary. This is an expansion for the Discovery Games edition. They may have rolled this content into the printed edition, but since I've never really seen this, and it appears to be quite rare, that might not actually be accurate. All right, here's another one of these baffling things that Avalon Hill did. Smoker's Wild. This is actually a Tom Douglas design, came from Columbia Games, or Gamma 2, as the case may be. It says that it is an anti-smoking game, like Drinker's Wild, which we will encounter momentarily. And that may be true. I have no idea. But I'm not going to play a board game on this subject. No, I am not doing that. However, interestingly, it is possible to do interesting board games on say, that topic. Annabelle Holland actually has a game called, I think, Doubt is Our Product, or something like that, coming at some point this year, that is basically about the tobacco manufacturers' drive to obfuscate the science that smoking is actually bad for you. And her mechanical description of it sounds absolutely fascinating, where it's like a completely different game from the two sides. That sounds amazing. And I'm very well, if I have the bandwidth to deal with it, it is a thing I may pick up. Okay. Panzerkrieg. We talked about this in the John Prados show. This is a game originally done by OSG, one of their relatively rare in the greater context of OSG's history, not Napoleonic games. Designed by John Prados. It is a pretty well-regarded game, and Compass is working on a new edition of it, which apparently is not going to be derailed by the unfortunate passing of John Prados. So which that's good. I'd rather have John Prados back, but if we can have the game, that's good too. That's nice. It'd be great to have John Prados back. Let me put it that way. Ghastly Avalon Hill, mid-70s pink and baby blue counters. Nobody knows what they were thinking. That's probably just what they had in the print shop at the time. All right, this one we're going to need to look up, because this one has a thorny history too. So Napoleon at Bay. This is what I would call a almost classic from Avalon Hill. Okay, this is a Kevin Zucker design. It's an operational game, and it is nowadays considered part of the Campaigns of Napoleon series. Stuka Joe says that in Panzerkrieg the counters didn't fit in the hexes. Boy, that's annoying. Old Lady Plays, this is exactly what I'm talking about when I say that most of these games that were done back at the time um, didn't do the history justice. Let me put it this way. Napoleon at Bay. Okay, nowadays part of the campaigns in Napoleon system was originally released by Tactical Studies Group, which is different from Tactical Studies Rules, and which I believe turned into Operational Studies Group when they realized, oh shit, there's Tactical Studies Rules out there. We are going to get sued, and they changed. So E4 Airman, I believe you are thinking of a different game than this. I believe you are thinking of one of the small box. Now, those all have a very similar history where they're Kevin Zucker games that originated with OSG, later made it to Avalon Hill, and were released in boxes that look a lot like these. Okay. These are the Avalon, what I call the Avalon Hill minis. And these are also both campaigns of Napoleon, operational Napoleonic games. And therefore very interesting because I believe in operational Napoleonics to be an underserved topic. The bit, oh God, there's apparently a fatality on the NFL game. Jesus Christ. That's a downer for the night. Napoleon at Bay. Um, this is a classic. Kyle Seeley did some content on this. Or a near classic. I think it's difficult to play. It's got some new ideas in it at the time. A lot of people kind of struggle with it. And fuck, this is an ugly box cover. I don't know what Avalon Hill, whether they got like the Dot's grandson to do this cover or what, but this is possibly the worst cover to ever appear in the history of Avalon Hill, and I am counting Dispatcher in that statement. It is a terrible cover. This OSG cover is better, quite a lot better actually. So there is a Napoleon at Bay update kit available from OSG. I believe it is still available. That will basically replace the counters and the rules and the displays for your Napoleon at Bay, and you can use it with whatever edition of Napoleon at Bay you have, whether it's this ugly one or the later Napoleon at Bay that was released by OSG later on. Now, why this gets its own entry and the other one doesn't, I'm not sure. This is the one that I've got. This is the last OSG version of the full game, but it is in an Avalon Hill sized box, which is irritating because the non-Avalon Hill sized rule expansion stuff from Kevin and OSG doesn't fit in this box, and that's annoying. This is one that I think I think this is a very interesting system, but it is not a system that has generally gained wide acceptance. So when we think about like operational topics, right, there are games that seem to dominate those spaces, right? Not just operational topics, but let's say World War II Squad Level Tactical. Well, the game that dominates that space is Squad Leader or ASL nowadays, right? The game system that dominates American Civil War operational is Great Campaigns of the American Civil War. There is no dominant entry in Napoleonic operational. There's a decent number of games, and eventually we'll do a video on that. But the closest thing to a prevalent system or lingua franca in that space that we have is the Campaigns of Napoleon system, which has over the years covered rather a lot. I have games on, just off the top of my head, this Napoleon at Bay, which is the campaign in France in 1814. I have 1809, which is the Danube campaign. I have Napoleon, Highway to the Kremlin, which is the invasion of Russia in 1812. I have the Eagles Turn East, which is the 1807 Eylau and Friedland campaign. So I've got Habit of Victory. I mean, I've got a lot of games in this space. And kind of like right after we moved, that's kind of what I was buying, was more of the Kevin Zucker operational stuff. I don't have them all, but I've got a lot of them now. Moving on, Fortress Europa. This is John Edwards' game. And in some respects, although the two games are not as similar as this statement implies, this is a game that is very much an attempt to do Russian campaign for the West Front. Okay. I think this is a game that holds up quite well. There is an updated edition of it from Compass, which I believe Compass has made it a 2-map game. I've seen it in person. It's the Compass edition is one of those things where I like saw the counters on the internet and I'm like, I don't really like these counters. I think they look the factors look too small. The counters look like they got a lot of empty space in them. And then when I physically saw the pieces at Compass Expo, I felt they looked a lot better. And frankly, I think the map looks pretty good too. This is the old Avalon Hill map, obviously. One of the interesting things going on here is that, like some games on this, like Grand West Front topic, you can do what you want. You can invade where you want. You want to invade in Brittany, you can do that. You want to invade in Calais, you can do that. You want to invade in the Med, you can do that. This actually gives you more ability to do that than other games like that do. But graphically it was maybe not as attractive as all that. The pieces are okay. I've got this. I think this is still a pretty strong game. I would be happy to play this, but that I think in my estimation, I believe that the Mighty Endeavor is a better game and gives you basically the same output for less effort. So with that caveat, I think Fortress Europa holds up reasonably well. Now, we have hit 10 p.m., and I want you folks to go over and watch Eric play La Bataille if he is doing that tonight. So we are going to finish 1978, and then we will call it a week, and we will come back with an episode 3 in 2 weeks. So what's next is Foreign Exchange. This is another financial game with, I have to say, a cover that I think is a pretty strong cover. I wonder if this is a Roger McGowan cover, thinking about it. Does it say? It does not say. I'd be curious to know who did that cover. So we're talking about Anzio, and really by far the best Anzio cover, just based on the cover, is the 4th edition Roger McGowan cover. I don't think it's close. The Mussolini cover is weird. The Landing Craft cover is boring, and the other cover is unmemorable, and I don't even remember what was on it. All right, Drinker's Wild, the companion to Smoker's Wild. One wonders what this goes for. I would consider this overpriced at $18. And again, it came out of Gamma 2. Cross of Iron, a squad leader gamette. This is the first of 3 expansions that came in boxes for squad leader. And these expansions all add rules and units and additional stuff. And eventually the game gets pretty crufted up by G.I. Angela Victory. And they decide, hey, we're going to do a revision. And what that revision evolves into over the course of the revising process is Advanced Squad Leader, which is essentially the same game, but rebuilt from the ground up to more smoothly incorporate all the weird stuff and odds and ends that these expansions introduce. You can get these in good shape. Here's somebody that wants $80 for Cross of Iron and allegedly like new condition. Great. Again, iconic Roger McGowan cover, as do all of these things have. Class Struggle. This isn't what I would call the great cover, but I think we have to acknowledge that this is, in fact, an amusing cover. The Game of Life in Capitalist America. Who is the designer of this fabulous gem? Bertel Ullman. Okay. Not a designer with whom I am familiar. And in fact, this is the only thing. And in fact, this guy looks rather a lot like Karl Marx in this picture. So, vehicle for instructing students on why Marxism is superior. Okay. This is obviously not something I've seen. Boy, that's a can of worms we could talk about, but not on this channel. My Henry Mike says he's going to play Mighty Endeavor this year, so that's fantastic. It's a great game. Plays very smoothly. It plays relatively quickly. Now I have to say, this sounds fucking dumb, but it sounds dumb in a way that makes me kind of want to check it out, right? Joe Mentum says he had this individual as a professor at NYU. Okay. It does look it. I don't think it's Monty Python, but it does look like Monty Python artwork. I have to. I believe we have to agree. All right, still 1978, Bismarck second edition. Why Bismarck gets a second edition, I don't know. I believe this is a totally different game from the Bismarck 62 designed by Lindsley Schultz and Charles Roberts. Okay. This is a Jack Green design. Okay. I want to say then that it is this one that I may actually be interested in and not the original. That is possible. All right. We are on 1979, which means that we will resume. We'll have a show next week, of course. We will resume our perusal of the best of Avalon and the worst, really, of Avalon Hill in about 2 weeks. Don't quote me on an actual calendar, but the plan is 2 weeks. I got the title card ready and everything. And we will start with Wizard's Quest, a fantasy game, which I've also never played. So maybe I'll buy a copy in the next 2 weeks and play it. That's incredibly unlikely, I have to say. But I think this has been great. We had 140 people or so at max before. Considering that I did no promotion of this show, I think we did okay. And people are probably still recovering from the holiday anyway. And some people are probably still sleeping off a Saturday. So I would like to point out that there should be, it's not up yet, but there should be an unboxing video on Thursday. That'll be something. I better have an unboxing video. I got a giant pile. I found all the other unboxing videos. And we should have the show with Dan tomorrow on Dan's channel at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. So check that out as well. So I would like to thank everybody for coming by. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please do subscribe. If you have not yet thumbs up to the video, please thumbs up the video. If you want an invite to the Discord server, the link provided in the video in the ticker is actually updated for this week, and I forgot to mention it at the front of the show because my notes this week sucked. But if you to miss the links are only good for 24 hours. So if you miss all that, just email me. The email address is in there too, and I will give you a one-off invite. That's not a problem. I just don't want to open it up and have a link sitting out there where every fucking bozo can sign into it and shit up my Discord server. So once again, I'd like to thank everybody. Farshad Niazi, welcome back. I'd like to welcome Dan Webb. Haven't seen you. If I missed you earlier, I apologize for that. And Vicky, who just popped in at like the last minute of the show. It will be available for viewing afterwards. You just won't have the ability to see the live chat for a couple of days. And that is just a weird YouTube limitation. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that I want to talk about that I didn't get to talk about today because I wanted to get into this discussion because I knew we had an absolute shit ton of entries because I randomly put 1982 on there thinking, 10 years, we can cover that tonight. We didn't. We got 7 years tonight. So we will cover the next batch in a separate episode, which I hope you will all stop by for. So everybody have a great night. We'll see you again soon, either tomorrow or next week.